Lovely. Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here. I'm going to talk about some pretty new research. So my name is Feni Kontogianni. I'm a lecturer at the University of Winchester, and this is a project I'm collaborating on with Lorraine Hope, Kirk Luther, and Alejandro de la Fuente Villar. We didn't plan with Kirk to present one after another, but it's actually a nice coincidence. So this is a project it goes back to an idea I had a while ago, but this is relatively new data, and we're doing more research on this. The idea is whether we can come up with some prompts that set expectations to facilitate detailed reporting in multicultural and investigative contexts. My area of research is also very much in the area of investigative interviewing, and although we have there's a large body of literature on how cultural influences communication overall, there is very little research on the influences of culture on investigative interviewing. So we know from the broader literature that we have communication strategies that depend on culture, and that can be on how we express and prioritize information. We also know that we can adapt the strategies depending on circumstances, so that can be when we're actually in a different cultural background, different cultural context to our own, or due to other situational demands. There is very little evidence on how culture affects reporting and investigative interviewing. There is some research that has come out relatively recently, and we see a common pattern there, that there is evidence of underreporting by people that belong to, as we say, non-weird samples, so non-Western educated, industrialized, rich democratic countries. And in the case of these studies that I've cited there, this was participants, for instance, from sub-Saharan Africa, and participants from Arab-speaking mock witnesses in these two experiments, compared to their counterparts that were UK-based or based in Northern Europe. They tended to provide less information, even when they engaged in free recall or using evidence-based practices. So as I said, this is quite new research, but there are some inferences as to what might be happening there. It might be due to culturally shared expectations and communication strategies that people use on that difference, depending on their culture. So it could be that in some countries, people present more modest rather than assertive, and that might define how much information they provide. Or there's another factor referred to as low versus high context communication style, which tends to be low context communication means more direct communication. So that would be people in North Europe and the UK. And high context would be communication embedded more in the context, in the conversation. Now, this really matters in investigative interviewing because we do have high standards of informativeness for good reason. There's also implications for deception detection, because some people might be perceived as not providing a lot of information, and so that they're being uncooperative, or they're hiding something, whereas they're actually providing information that to them, they're willing to provide information, and it's not perceived as little information. So the idea here is that we should take this into account for interviewing methods that could account for cultural norms. And maybe we can use prompts that set normative expectations of what detailed reporting is for investigative contexts. So if we used prompts that for now we're labeling as instructive prompts, following an initial account that established the level of detail required in a response and why, that would have the potential to override any default communication strategies that led to a brief initial account, let's say because someone would present as modest to begin with. Just to show concrete examples, these are the kind of prompts we used in this experiment I'm presenting today. So we're calling them instructive prompts versus direct prompts. They're all open-ended prompts, and that is according to evidence-based practice. So the difference there would be, instead of a direct prompt that would be describe in detail the people involved in the incident, an instructive prompt would then say, instead, describe the people involved in the incident in enough detail that would enable someone else to pick them out in a crowd. We're not really reinventing the wheel here. Some of this prompts might make a lot of sense. And I think this example, especially about person descriptions, is often used in training. But we apply that principle to different types of prompts that can be used for a crime-related event. In this case, let's say a robbery. So people could also be asked to describe the items that were stolen in enough detail that would enable someone to find them, identify them, return them, or describe the rooms in enough detail that would enable someone else to draw a map or sketch, to come back to sketching. So this is just this principle of kind of setting the expectation for how much detail would be enough. We hypothesize that participants who are asked instructive prompts following an initial account will report a higher total number of correct details overall, and we've pre-registered our hypothesis and our methods. We decided to do this using recruiting a diverse sample within the UK. There is quite a debate in the broader literature and culture about doing cross-cultural research versus looking at within-nation variations, because by doing cross-cultural research, we assume that those countries then are homogeneous. We think the UK is a good example where we can find people with from diverse ethnic backgrounds. So we decided to go this route to begin with. And we conducted the study on Prolific with 179 participants. We had 58% white participants, but across the board, people were from diverse ethnic backgrounds, and I'll come to that in a second. They needed to be fluent English speakers, and they needed to reside in the UK, but they didn't have to be born in the UK. So we had 35% of participants, and this is a snapshot of where they came from, where they were born in different countries. So even white participants might have come from countries other than the UK. We also wanted them to self-identify as multicultural individuals, which was something we could use as a criterion. And we asked them why they identify as multicultural. So I've pulled up here some quotes just to show examples of the kind of what we're talking about when we talk about multicultural heritage in our data set. So people could be born in a different country and then assimilated into the UK culture, but speak both languages. They follow traditions from both countries. I quite like this quote about how they've learned to appreciate customs, traditions, and values of both cultures, because it really encapsulates pretty much everything about culture. So about 68 participants, talked about their father or mother or both parents having ethnicity and heritage that was from another background. And you can see here how much variation can exist and what we're talking about when we're saying multicultural individuals and diverse heritage. So people that have heritage from really countries all over the world. So we had our participants, because we didn't categorize them according to what they said was maybe their cultural heritage. They had this characteristics coming into the study. We wanted to see how much of that explains some of the variance we would get in reporting at the end. We basically had them complete a cultural communication scale, and we want to use that score as a covariate variable. I'll explain that when it comes to the results. So they completed this cultural communication scale first, and then they witnessed an event that was about a house invasion. So two perpetrators broke into a flat, and there was a female victim there as well. They stole some things. After a short interval of 10 minutes, they were asked to provide a police statement. So that was when they provided an initial statement, sort of free recall. And then they were asked follow-up prompts, which was the point where they were randomized across conditions. They also did acute recall test. We didn't find any differences there, so I'm not going to talk more about that. And they completed some more questionnaires. So what we found, as I said, they weren't in different conditions to begin with at initial reporting stage, but we wanted to check our data to see if there were any differences that came up at reporting initially. We didn't want them to be, and there weren't, so that's the good thing. So at initial reporting, they provide a similar amount of information when they engaged in free recall. We were more interested in what happened at the total reporting stage. So after they also responded to the follow-up prompts, which were either instructive or direct. And I'm providing here a lot of information so you can see the underlying distribution of the data. We did have a significant difference there. So participants that were in the instructive prompts condition overall reported more information than participants who were in the direct prompts condition. So a couple of points that are worth mentioning about that effect there. I know this is a small to moderate effect. I think it's important to point out that this is a very subtle manipulation. We're still asking people to respond to open-ended prompts. And we see that there is more information being provided when the prompts set that expectation of level of detail, which is good. And there might be some concerns about the fact that you can see there might be some outliers in there. We've also run the analysis without the outliers, and the results hold, the statistical significant results hold. So I'm just going to say that, and I'm welcome to answer. I'm happy to answer any questions about the outliers. Looking into exploring the data, some of them actually reported a lot more information in response to the prompts. So that's how they became outliers. A note on accuracy across reporting. So from the initial stage of the account to follow-up prompts, there were no significant differences across phases, but I'm bringing this up still as a point to be cautious about, because we have seen in previous research as well that accuracy can drop from initial account stage to answering questions, basically, because people are being asked to be more informative, and they might now be providing more information that they're not as confident about. So when we explore into the data, we can see that accuracy did drop to some extent. For some participants, it dropped quite a bit, maybe, but overall, there was no significant difference across reporting phases. And as I said, we were very interested, and I'm coming to the end of the results, in whether there is the cultural aspect, the cultural heritage that varied in our sample basically explains some of the variance that we might have seen in reporting using this cultural communication scale. And it has been used in previous research, this scale, but as you can see, there was not a strong relationship with the reporting outcomes. We couldn't know that until we tested it, so that's fine. It might be an issue of measurement and how we measure cultural communication styles and aspects that can affect reporting. But what we can tell, tentatively speaking, from looking at the data in this graph is that because the culture mean score that you see there, the higher that score goes, it indicates more high context communication tendencies, so more embedded into the context of the conversation, rather than direct. So that might show us that people with a tendency to report information with a higher context communication style might not be affected by the direct prompts, but the instructive prompts, which is the line on the top, might be keeping that tendency in check. It might be more likely to report higher amount of information regardless of existing communication style tendencies. This is a very tentative finding. And the important thing is that the covariate did not explain the variance we found really in the data. So the main question was whether prompts that set expectations facilitate detailed reporting in a multicultural investigative context, and we can answer that with a yes. As a take-home message, we'd say that instructive prompts do lead to more elaborate reporting with interviews that come from diverse ethnic backgrounds and with rich cultural heritage. But it's important to keep in mind that this is one study, and the more we're doing more work where we're going to try and replicate this result and also see if we can use other cultural communication scales to explore the role of culture more. And I'm all ears if anyone has any suggestions. We're also going to test this with different stimuli, eventually maybe cross-culturally, but for now we want to see that this finding holds across replication. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions.